Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel Pisces Paperbacks, and today we're going to be talking about my 10 favorite books of 2020. I decided to just do one list of fiction and nonfiction because as I was setting up my tier ranking that I'm going to be doing of all the books I rated 5 stars in 2020, I realized that a lot of the books that I was agonizing about not being able to mention in this video, I would actually get a good chance to talk about in that video. So this is just my favorite 10 books. I'm very excited to talk about them. I love all of these so very much. The first 7 books I'm going to talk about are chronological, so starting with the first book that I read in the year, all the way up to the most recent book that I read in the year that I really loved and want to talk about, and then the final 3, so my top 3 books, are in order of, like, number 1, number 2, number 3. Before I start, I did want to also add that I'm not including rereads. So I reread J.R.R. this year in March, and that is my favorite book of all time. So if I was like actually doing this, like that would be number 1, but I'm not including it. So J.R.R. Charlotte Bronte is my favorite book ever, so it's unfair to include it. The first book, number 10 on the list of books that I loved this year, is Nevermoor, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. So this is a middle grade fantasy about a girl named Morgan Crow who is basically blamed for like everything bad that goes wrong in her town. And one day, a man named Jupiter sweeps into her life and takes her away to this magical city called Nevermoor, where she is entered in these trials to join the Wonder Society, I believe it's called. And it's kind of like competition to get into a magical school, and then book 2 is the magical school book. And I didn't love this one quite as much as the first one, but I just needed to talk about. I love these books. I think that this is so inventive and fantastical and wonderful, and I feel like these books are going to give a lot of the people the feeling of wonder and just imagination that we loved as kids and maybe don't get as often in adult books. And I just love this. It just made me so happy. I read them and then on audio, and then I bought them the same month, and I love them. I love them very much. And I just bought the third one. You can't see it, and it's stacked under books, so I don't want to pull it out, but it's right over there, and I'm just gonna read it soon. I'm so excited. On to number 2. My next favorite book that I read this year was the Lord of the Rings trilogy by J.R.R. Tolkien. I've had this bind up for years, literally years, probably a decade or more, I don't even know. And at one point in my life, I did read at least most of the first book, and I remember I read The Hobbit a couple times because I liked it when I was like, I don't know, 12 or something, but I could never get into this. It was just so long, and it was like, I didn't care about the writing, and this year I challenged myself to read all 3 of the Lord of the Rings books in one weekend. And to say it was successful is an understatement. Not only did I complete them, I cried about them. I loved the characters. I loved the story. I loved like how much thought and care went into the construction of this whole world. I do have to say, I don't really care about the battle scenes. So like I kind of skim read some of the fights. And when they were like talking about the fights afterwards, I was also like, okay, I was there, I saw it. But I think about this series way more than I ever thought I would. I spent like a month after finishing just reading Lord of the Rings fanfiction because I was like, I'm not ready to leave these characters. I'm just not. And I still haven't watched the movies, but that is something I do need to do this year. So yeah, I just like, it's so weird because obviously this is one of the most beloved fantasy series of all time, like set the groundwork for what fantasy is now basically, but I just never thought I'd like it that much, and then here I am obsessed with it, thinking about buying a new copy of every book so that I don't have to have this giant thing if I ever decide to reread. And my next favorite book of the year, number 8, is A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. So this is a contemporary romance, and I just loved it. I remember listening to the audiobook in my car and just like screaming with like happiness and excitement of like how cute it was, and just, oh my gosh, like this is one of those romances that has like a cool premise and then really delivers. So the basic premise of this is like, what if those scammy emails that you got from Nigerian princes were actually real? So the main character of A Princess in Theory is getting these emails that she's the betrothed of the prince of this fictional African country, and she's like, obviously not. But then, like, he shows up in her life, and there's a bit of, like, mistaken identity plot, which was very stressful for me, but I still enjoyed. And while I think the pacing at the very end was, like, kind of weird, the pure joy that this book gave me, not to mention the fact that it made me interested in contemporary romance again, because contemporary romance is just, like, not something that I'm generally interested in. This book, I was like, maybe I do like contemporary romance. Maybe there is something to offer there. I just loved it so much. It made me so happy. I've read 2 more Alyssa Cole books this year, and while A Princess in Theory is still my favorite of the 3, all of them were extremely enjoyable, and she's a new, like, favorite author of mine. And then up next, number 7, another romance. The Sum of All Kisses by Julia Quinn. So you may have heard of Julia Quinn because the Bridgerton series just came out on Netflix, which is based off of her Bridgerton book series. And while I haven't read any of those, this is the second Julia Quinn I've read, and I loved it. I read it in one day, and I just fell in love with the humor and the writing style and the characters. This book follows Sarah and Hugh over the course of 2 weekends when they have to attend 2 weddings, and Sarah hates Hugh because she blames him for, like, her cousin having to leave the country a few years ago, but he's back now. He's one of the people getting married at the weddings, and Hugh blames Sarah for, like, hating him for no reason. And the humor and kind of like the meta commentary on the romance genre, like, within this book, I could just instantly, as I was reading, see it as, like, a romantic comedy, like historical romantic comedy period piece, and it's just so good. I will say, I want everybody to read this. I love this, although there's only, like, 1.5 sex scenes, so I could have used another one, but whatever. I will say the final conflict in this book is, like, truly one of the stupidest things I've ever read in my entire life. I don't think it makes sense on, like, any level, and I think it's convoluted to the nth degree, and it's really, like, almost, like, took this book out of, like, the 5-star range for me, because I was like, really? But when I think about this book, I don't think about the ending. I think about the characters, and I think about their chemistry and their relationship and just how much I loved them. So I love this book so much. Number 6 is another book that I don't have with me, and that is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book is the only one on the list that I didn't give 5 stars. It actually has, I gave it a 4-star rating, which I might retroactively bump up because it's one of my favorites of the year. And this is an interesting one because on the one hand, I really didn't enjoy reading this book. It is a really difficult contemporary following a 15-year-old girl as she enters a relationship with her English teacher, and then 17 years later as an adult when she is kind of reckoning with the fact that this relationship that she sees as, like, the romantic story of her life was more of a situation of abuse and manipulation, and it was so difficult to listen to and like really hurt to see that story through, even though I found it very gratifying at the end. But on the other hand, I think about this book a lot, like all the time. I think I've recommended it to people more often than a lot of the other books on this list, and I just thought it was such a well done, complex, nuanced look at what it means to be a survivor, and there's no one correct way to be a survivor, and that trauma really manifests in a lot of different ways. I thought that Kate Elizabeth Russell did an incredible job, especially from the 15-year-old's perspective, where you can see the cognitive dissonance of 15-year-old Vanessa convincing herself that it's like this love story, while at the same time the reader being able to see the abuse. Like, it was just so incredibly well done, hard to read, but worthwhile to read, and I think about it all the time. So I just felt like it had to be on this list. Up next, and on a slightly lighter note, my 5th favorite book of the year is Little Weirds by Jenny Slate. I picked up this book because I saw Sarah from String Bean Books talking about it, and it ended up being their favorite book of the year. So I just felt so understood. This is an creative nonfiction. I wouldn't say that it's a memoir. I wouldn't really say that it's an essay collection because it's almost surrealist, but it's this look at Jenny Slate's life over the course of, I think, like a year, maybe 2 years, while she is dealing with the end of a relationship and trying to figure out who she wants to be as an independent person, and her relationships and her friendships and her creative process. And it is like, it's not, again, they're not like essays, they're kind of like every chapter is a story, and I just felt so understood while I was reading this. And when I saw a copy at Target a few weeks ago, I knew I had to pick it up to have in my arms. And I listened to this book while I was at work a few months ago, so I wasn't really able to fully emote the way I want to. So I'm planning on rereading this year and hopefully getting all the crying out that I feel this book deserves. Before we get to number 4, I would just like to remind everyone that this is my favorite books of the year. It doesn't have to be anyone else's favorite books of the year, and that if you don't like one of the books that I like, you probably have extremely valid criticism. Like, everybody has the right to dislike any book. You know what I mean? Also, this book is purely based on enjoyment and how much happiness these books bring me. So while I do own a copy, it is not here because I lent it to a family member to read. My 4th favorite book of the year is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. And I don't know if I can explain to you effectively how shocked to the core I was when Stephenie Meyer announced this book was coming out. Because I read the leaked partial PDF on her website like the year that it was released, so 2012. No, 2008. I've read it probably 10 times since then. And then to get the news that this book that I've been waiting for 12 years was not only coming and going to be in my hands, but it was going to be 600 pages long. Honestly, this book, it's almost not fair because there's really no way this book could have disappointed me. There's almost no way this book could have let me down. And while I do have many and varied criticisms, things that I didn't like, things that I wish weren't there, things that I wish were there, when it comes to just the pure feeling of joy that I get from reading a book, almost none compare to how I felt when I was reading Midnight Sun, which is Twilight from Edward's perspective, as we all know, and I just loved it, and that's really all I can say. It's probably going to become my most read. I'm probably going to reread it like 6 million times, and I'm okay with that. I'm ready to accept my fate. Okay, so now we've got to the top 3. And these are the books that I purposely ranked in this order. I love them. These books changed me as a person, and I find them hard to talk about sometimes, except that what I just said was absolutely a lie because I never shut up about them. So here we go. In position 3 of my favorite books of the year, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is a new adult contemporary romance about the son of the first woman president who was elected in 2016 in like an alternate America, and the Prince of England, who is also fictional. This book is just like the warm and fuzzies made into an object. Like the experience of reading this book made my whole body feel like it was filled with like sunlight or, I don't know, dandelions, something along those lines. I loved the characters. Alex and his sexuality crisis when he's realizing that he is probably bisexual was so deeply, like, I felt that so hard. And I was younger than he was when I came out as bisexual or realized I was bisexual, but like those feelings don't change. They don't change. Like, those feelings are just so real. And their relationship, I loved how quickly they kind of became involved. A lot of people have been pitching this book. I think originally were pitching this book as a hate to love or enemies to lovers. And this year I saw a lot of videos where people were like, I don't think this should have been marketed as hate to love because they really don't hate each other that long. To which I say, yeah, of course they don't hate each other for that long because this isn't a hate to love. This isn't a hate to love, and I feel so strongly about it. This, if anything, if you're gonna like market it as some sort of trope, is a secret romance or like forbidden romance. When you look at it through like that expectation, I feel like it's going to meet everybody's expectations, and I don't really like hate to love, so I was a bit trepidatious going into it, but it quickly won me over. I cried while I was listening to the audiobook. I own 2 copies of it. I lent the other copy to my brother because he's rereading it right now. And I did get Book of the Month specifically so that I could get this hardcover version, because the first printing of Red, White, and Royal Blue was in paperback, so I think this is my only chance to get a hardback of it, which now that I'm like thinking about it, I don't really like hardcovers that much. I don't like reading them, so this is just like to have a second copy to love, I guess. And that is my 3rd favorite book of the year. So number 2 of my favorite books of the year is a book that is probably one of my new favorite books of all time, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So this is the story of Zachary Ezra Rollins. He is a grad student in New York, and one day he discovers a book, and one of the chapters in this book is a story of something that happened to him when he was a kid, and he's like, how the fuck do you know about this? But through this book, he basically realizes that when he was a child, he had an opportunity that he missed to go to this place called the Starless Sea, which is kind of like a magical underground library, and people like devote themselves to it in different ways, and he kind of goes on this journey to find a way back to the Starless Sea and then save the Starless Sea from thing that I'm not going to mention. And this is really a story about stories and about books and how stories can weave together to create this bigger tapestry that can be life or magic or imagination. And this is really, if you have to read a book for the characters, while I love the characters in here, I think a lot of people would find them very underdeveloped and their relationships somewhat underdeveloped. I was invested enough that I really cared for them, but the thing that really pulled me through the story and the thing that really stole my heart, is a very dumb thing to say but is true, is just the world and the magic and the layers and how everything ties together, but in a way that doesn't quite end because it's the beginning of a new story, and the cyclical nature of storytelling and imagination. And oh my god, this book is just so full of love and it really felt like Erin Morgenstern took my soul, shredded it into little pieces, and paper mache'd it into something else, and then was like, here is the masterpiece that you've been waiting for, and just put it right there where your heart used to be, because your heart's mine now. And that's how I feel about this. And you might be wondering, Morgan, why is this your number 2 spot instead of your number 1 spot? Because number 1, while I do like love, and I want to talk about, and we'll get to it in a second, I feel like this is more of a slow burn love. I feel like this is a book that I'm going to reread and feel like it's growing with me in a lot of ways. And like Jane Eyre is my favorite book of all time, and even though I read that book and I'm filled with love, there are other books that I read where I have like a more immediate reaction of enjoyment, if that makes any sense. And this is similar to that, whereas I'm like so full of like love and warmth when I read this book, but it's not something that I'm like devouring with this immediate instant gratification sort of love, if that makes any sense. So I don't know if that made any sense. That was truly just word vomit. I love this book a lot. And number 1, you probably have guessed, because I haven't talked about it yet, but I haven't shut up about it this whole year, and that is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. These 2 books have very similar emotional responses for me, but I think this book is pushed up a little bit more, one, because I read it more recently, but also because of the magic and the way that the magic really puts a barrier to their relationship. Because, like, yes, they can't be together because, you know, son of the president and the royal prince, but in this, Julian's a ghost. How do you overcome that? And okay, let me start over. It's the story of J.R.R, and he is a trans boy who is trying to prove to his family that he like is a boy, but they are a very traditional and very like gendered community where men are brujos who are able to summon ghosts and then help them pass on to whatever is beyond, to death, and then women are brujas who are able to use healing magic. And J.R.R is like, I'm a brujo, And so he starts off the book doing his coming of age ceremony by himself, and Lady Death, the goddess, is like, yeah, you're a brujo, here's your spirit magic. And so he's like, cool, but to prove himself extra, he decides that he's going to find the spirit of his cousin who was murdered that same night and help him pass on and figure out how he died to prove to his family that he's a brujo. But instead, he summons the spirit of Julian, who is the bad boy from his high school who was also killed that night and doesn't know how. So it's like they're stuck together. They need to figure out how Julian died, and Yadriel is like, oh, this kid's so annoying, but Julian is just so lovable, and I just loved these characters so gosh darn much. I think this has a real like fan fiction quality where it's like very wish fulfillment-y, but in a way that like, I mean, I love fan fiction. I loved this book. I loved their relationship. I loved the characters. I think that if you go into this thinking like, oh, it's like a romance, but it's also a mystery, and I'm really interested in the mystery as well, like who killed Julian, who killed Yadriel's cousin. If you're really like, I want there to be a lot of mystery in this, I think you might be a little disappointed. I was able to guess like halfway through the book, maybe a little earlier, what like was going to happen. Not the details. I didn't know how the end was actually going to go, but I knew who like the villain was, and it didn't affect my enjoyment at all. It didn't affect my enjoyment at all. I truly just, oh my god, this book is so good and fun and happy and joyful, and it deals with death and grief and just like found family, and I have already like, my sister's in the middle of reading it right now, and I've recommended it to like every single person that I know, and you should read it because it's not that long and it's so good. And honestly, listen to the audiobook. Like, read this, it's also good. But if you're interested in it, I think you'd really like the audiobook because I don't speak Spanish and the audiobook says the lines in Spanish the way that they're obviously supposed to be pronounced, whereas like if I was reading it, I don't think I could get the nuances so well. And then there's also a specific like emotional moment that happens that does specifically have to do with one of the characters speaking Spanish, and I fucking cried. I was at work washing my hands in the bathroom, about to go back out. I open the door, this thing happens, and thank God I was wearing a mask because I'm literally like walking back outside like oh my god. Again, this is a book I love and I'm always going to love. And at this point, at least, since I finished it on like the first day of October, I think about it all the time, like all the time, every day. This is a book that I read in February or March, and I don't think about it as often, but when I do think about it, I am just like enraptured by all of the detail and foreshadowing and imagery and symbolism that Morgenstern was able to put into this book. So these are like co-favorites of the year. I just don't even know what to do with myself, so now I've been talking for 35 minutes, so I think it's time to wrap this up. Those are my 10 favorite books of the year. Well, I guess kind of 12 favorite books of the year, because I'm counting this as all one book, so it's 10, because specifically my favorite book of the three of these was Return of the King, but I just can't think of this as 3 separate books, so I don't know. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book of the year was. I'd love to hear. I'd love to read it, because if it's your favorite, then it's probably good and I'll like it too. So let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in a couple days with, I think, my favorite authors of the year, which will be really fun. Bye!